Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 1 of Anime Deep Dive. I am your host, Dr. Yovi Midori. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I am here with my co host, who just so happens to be my daughter.
Hello, my name is Gal. Me and my mom have been watching anime since forever, so I'm excited to be on this podcast with her.
So, we are watching anime. We are identifying different mental health issues within the anime, talking about the diagnosis, the symptoms, the way that they're portrayed in the anime, and things that perhaps we can do to address these issues in our own life. By no means is this podcast gonna take place of someone actually seeking therapeutic intervention, but it's just an idea of those mental health disorders that exist and how these animes are portraying the different disorders within their episodes. What do you think about that, Gal?
I'm not a social worker or a licensed therapist in that sense, so I'm just here as a buffer between a professional and a common person that just wants to understand more about the characters.
And just asking questions about the
Yeah.
disorders, right? At the same time, just expressing our love for the medium. I've been watching anime since I was about 6 years old. I started with Voltron, which is like a mech anime like Gundam, and Sailor Moon. And then watching animated movies like Fist of the North Star. Those were the kind of shows that I watched when I was a kid. When my daughter was coming up, I think the first anime that you got exposed to is
Naruto, and then I got deeper into like shoujo anime, like Peach Girl and Magical Girl anime.
yeah,
Variety.
and watching it primarily on Toonami, right? Like on Cartoon Network.
It started that way, but then it was more like 10-part episodes on YouTube because it was.
Yeah, and YouTube was a place where I think everybody who started liking anime gravitated towards because we didn't have the streaming services like we do now. Like now you could find even classic anime on like Hulu. And there is a lot on Amazon Prime. I was looking at Amazon Prime the other day and there's some really like old classic anime on there that for us that grew up with them or people that are just getting used to it or getting into it, you can really start on Amazon Prime, really see some of the old stuff. And some of the old anime, I have to tell you, there's some hidden gems in.
Yeah, even still YouTube. I just watched the whole Initial D movie on YouTube. And that's what, maybe 1998, 2001. And they just took off the entire series off Crunchyroll. So I thought it was lost forever, but yeah, even YouTube is still a great resource. They still have a lot of them on playlists and stuff.
And then there's still even some anime on YouTube that aren't on any of the streaming services. I think you could see the entire season 1, but once she gets into high school, you lose it,
Yeah.
right? And they even have the English dub on there where I typically gravitate more towards English dub. Sorry, fandom. But I like the English dub a lot. I like the different infliction on the voices that a lot of the characters take when it's the English dub. That sometimes gets lost in translation with the Japanese version. Really, when we're looking at all of these mediums, you have all of these different ways to view anime now that didn't exist back in the day.
Yeah. So the anime today, which is quite old.
Yes. So the anime today and some anime also doesn't originate from manga, which is interesting because a lot of people think that all anime originates from manga, but not all, right? But this particular one that we're talking about today does originate from a manga, and the manga came out in 2003, and the anime is called
Welcome to the NH.
Yes. Welcome to the NHK is one of those animes that I saw back when I was watching. There was a period of time that I stopped watching anime. Obviously, I got older. I started getting into boys. So I stayed away a little bit from anime and I rediscovered it when my daughter got older. And I started watching anime so that she wouldn't watch some of the anime that I thought was inappropriate, right? I started watching a lot of different anime and buffering it so that she wouldn't watch the inappropriate
Which
ones.
is funny because I still watched all of them anyway. It was the dawn of the internet. I think every kid ever found a sneaky way to watch anything they wanted.
Yeah. I remember watching some anime that I was absolutely mortified, thinking if she ever sees this, it would be so inappropriate. But Welcome to NHK was one of them where I went in full steam ahead watching it, saying, okay, I'm going to watch this and hopefully it's appropriate for her to watch. Welcome to NHK. The manga came out in 2003, but the anime came out in 2006. And by the way, you can still watch the entire 24 episodes on Crunchyroll, right? I was watching it off Funimation back when Funimation was still in effect, but it is now totally on Crunchyroll. So the anime starts off, we have these three main characters, right? The main character is Sato. He is a 20-something-year-old guy living by himself in Japan, right? And particularly in Tokyo. And then we have his next door neighbor,
Yamazaki.
yeah, his next door neighbor, Yamazaki. Then we have this mysterious girl that knocks on his door one day called Misaki, right? So, the main character, there's a lot of stuff going on with Sato, right? Not a lot of stuff in meaning that he's doing much of anything, but there's a lot of stuff going on psychologically with Sato. Sato is what we call a Hikikomori. In English, Hikikomori is like a shut-in, right? If I was to be a therapist working with Sato, we would say that Sato has what we call agoraphobia. Agoraphobia is basically when somebody is just a shut-in, is afraid to leave their house, afraid to socialize with anybody. There's a fear of going outdoors. The safety of their home is what the individual feels they need in order for them to feel safe.
So are those symptoms purely mental, or are there also like physical sensations that they might feel with that?
A person may get like super sweaty. Their heart might palpitate really strongly. They may have just an innate fear of even having a conversation with anybody. And we see those symptoms in the very, very first episode where we meet Sato, right? So we see him living in this tiny apartment in Tokyo.
So I think he just had a tiny fridge and a small area for his appliances.
Yeah, I don't even think he had one.
Yeah, he had a microwave.
Yeah,
Because then he
yeah,
heat up his cup noodles.
yeah, and that's what he ate. He ate ramen.
Yeah, he had a few appliances he would talk to, like his TV, his
Exactly. Again,
the age that
yes,
came out, it made
exactly.
sense. But
We're talking about 2003,
if I
2006 people.
if
So
I remember correctly, him and Yamazaki, their house was structured in a way that it wasn't wide, but it was like is tall the word I'd
yeah,
use?
because he had a lot.
Yes, his look.
Yeah,
At least Yamazaki did, which we know he had a little. No, yes, he did because Misaki hid all of his clothes up there one time with his mom.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, their house was like they had a lot of upward space. It was like a loft space.
Yeah.
He just didn't keep it tidy enough. But yeah, I would call that an apartment. There's no bells and whistles, but seeing as he didn't have a job, I would admit that.
Yeah,
I don't expect much from him.
yeah, it was livable. Let's say that. It was livable. He was maintaining himself to some kind of level, being
He was able to exist.
and I think and where he was psychologically, I think that's all he needed or all he felt he had to have at that point. He was a college dropout. We learned later on in the anime that the reason that he dropped out was because he started feeling these symptoms connected to social phobia, to agoraphobia, and he couldn't handle it anymore. He couldn't handle the concept of social structures that exist within the structures of school and work. He just couldn't deal with it. So, because of this, he dropped out of school. His mother and father were basically supporting him. They were giving him an allowance. This is how he was buying food. This is how he was paying. But other than that, there wasn't much else going on with Sato. And then one day he says to himself, I'm gonna go get a job. Right? It's almost like people experiencing these type of psychological disorders, they do have bouts of wanting to change at the beginning. They are fully recognizing that the way that they are living is not quote unquote part of society or the way that people expect you to. try to stay away from the word normal. I don't particularly care for that word because I think we all have certain levels of quirkiness that makes the word normal seem like, what the hell is normal? Who defines what normal is? I want to say,
Not typical.
yeah. And
What's typical? I think most people fall in some middle realm.
yeah,
Typical would be maybe not overachieving, but being able to hold a conversation with someone and hold a job, maybe not a job you're excelling at, but a job.
a job.
Atypical would be him, who's a shut-in. So
Yeah.
he's striving for some kind of a societal
Stability.
norm, like how society would normally expect you to function. But
Yeah, so at a certain point, he gets this idea. This is what I need to be. He tries to go into this like an internet cafe type of place to apply for a job. With the back in the days when not a lot of people had computers or internet in their house, they can go to a storefront that had computers, and you could go in there and rent time on the computer, rent time on the internet. Let's say you wanted to research something, you could go to these internet cafe, pay a certain fee, flop down in front of a computer, and just browse the web all day.
and I know about them, but I want you guys to know about them.
In Japan,
Yeah, I mean, they have internet cafes
well, we
anymore.
did. Well, we did. But even then, you couldn't set up shop like they do in Japan.
Okay, I don't want Japan. They like they will pay that thing like rent.
Oh yeah, you can just segue. There's this anime called Agretsuko, and that's on Netflix. And in one of the seasons, her boyfriend ends up getting kicked out of his house. She kicks him out because he doesn't have a job, and he ends up living in an internet cafe, literally sleeping on a reclining chair. And that's like the cheapest way to have somewhere to live without actually being in a hotel room. So yeah, in Japan, you could totally do that. So he walks into the place wanting to apply for a job, then gets pretty much spooked because he has to talk to a girl. And he runs back home with its tail between his legs and doesn't apply for the job. And then who comes knocking at his door? But the same girl that's in the internet cafe, which ended up being Misaki. So she ends up knocking on his door with her aunt with a pamphlet talking about what? The exact syndrome that he has, which is Hikikomori or agoraphobia for us here in the States.
Are those things synonymous, or is it like there's a couple different nuances, but in each culture we just have a similar name for somebody that has that life?
In Japan, they're called hikikomoris, but here we would say that the person is a shut-in.
Hikikomori in Japan, is that considered a disorder or a way of life? Okay.
Both. I think that at first Japan wasn't really familiar. There's an excellent on net on YouTube called Hikikomori's Dying in Plain Sight. And it really talks about how this condition of hikikomori is really difficult for people in Japan to deal with. There are individuals that are being taken care of by their elderly parents. And when their elderly parents die, they end up just fading away and dying themselves because their disorder is so prevalent that they can't even leave their house to go get food. It's definitely a really big issue that's going on in Japan. And Japan itself, they have a lot of social issues, meaning issues that they have difficulty socializing with each other. And that's causing a lot of problems for the Japanese population. So when this anime came out, it was when they started really seeing an uptake in young people with this disorder. And primarily it was because everything is expected of you. You go to school, you get a job, you have a family. There's a kind of a trajectory to these things. And when these individuals were seeing that their life wasn't going in the trajectory that they wanted it to, it was making them really depressed. And they felt like they had no other option but to become shut ins. So this particular situation is very similar to what's going on with Sato. So Misaki knocks on his door. She gives him a pamphlet about what it is to be a hikikomori and ways to combat it. And then she comes back later on and basically tells him, I'm going to try to help you fix this issue that you have. You're a hikikomori and I'm going to help you change. And she sets up meetings with him in the local park next near the apartment building. They're going to talk about the different things that is affecting him and different ways to change the fact that he's a hikikomori.
So will this podcast include spoilers or no spoilers?
I for in order to really dive into what we're doing with the disorder and kind of talk about different ways to address it, I think it's only natural for some of the little spoilers to come out, right?
Okay, so is this a typical way that somebody might go through? Well, obviously, that's not a typical therapeutic intervention. Like, we don't all have a Misaki at our door.
No, we
But
don't.
if somebody was a Hikikomori and they wanted some kind of intervention, is that kind of like the way it would go? Like mandatory meetings, and I'm familiar with the things that Misaki wanted him to do. Like, she wanted him to talk about his hopes, his dreams, what to do in certain situations, and each time she saw him, it was like a test of his courage to do the next thing. Is that the kind of treatment process that a hikikomori would go through? Like in therapy with their therapist, they would continuously push the boundaries of what they could do in society, just like how Misaki pushed him, or would it look different?
It's similar, we would obviously use a modality called cognitive behavior therapy, which is like to address the misaligned thoughts, misaligned connections with the things that you should do and the way that your thoughts and your behaviors are affecting them, right? So we go through a whole therapeutic process. With the shut in, it's difficult. The main thing with someone who has agoraphobia, social phobia, and they're coming to see a therapist is congratulating them for just showing up, right? And I think that's one of the things that should be done with every person that is seeking therapy for the first time, because that in itself is a huge a lot of people, when they're identifying that there is an issue that's affecting them, it takes a lot of courage to make that first step to actually walk into the office of a therapist and actually try to make an appointment, walk into to a community clinic and actually seek out the services of a therapist. So a shut-in coming to see a therapist, that alone is a big accomplishment, right? And first you have to talk about the right because usually something happens that sent the person on this trajectory. And we learned that there were several things that happened to Sato that affected him that kind of pushed him into the point of being a shut-in. So for Sato in particular, one of the things that happened to him was that he was bullied. He was bullied in high school. He wasn't a very good student. He didn't really know what he wanted to do as he got older. And he was isolated. He was in a literary club where he just played cards with the upperclassmen for the majority of the time. He didn't really have a very close relationship with his parents. He didn't really have a lot of friends. By the time he
Well,
got
his mom seemed to dote on him quite a bit.
she she was present, but she really didn't know much about him as a person. And I think that also affected how he was able to make connections with other people. I think when we're getting older, the very first people that we start to make connections with is our families, right? Our moms, our dads, our siblings, our guardians, whoever we grew up with, whoever took the time to be part of our lives. And those relationships have a lot of kind of significance in the relationship that we develop with other people. He didn't have a very connective or close relationship.
Hmm. Like, you're so there was a part in the series where Misaki and Sato were basically pretending that they were in a relationship because his
Yes.
mom was coming to visit.
Yes.
And I specifically remember there was a story. Sato was like going through his whole trials and tribulations of I'm lying a whole bunch right now and I don't know what to do. And he went to the bathroom, and his mom told Misaki that he had always been a very honest boy. Do you remember? And that he was a very sensitive boy. And because of that, it's like he always felt the weight of the world at all times. And he felt like he had to be
Maybe he felt he had to be perfect.
perfect. Yes. But I guess I'm saying that to say, I don't know if that's in his relationship with his mom. I think his need to be perfect for her.
I felt like she didn't really. I believe that there was a part where she was having a conversation with him, And I think she asked him about what was he doing with his life. And that's when he started lying about making the game with his neighbor with Yamazaki. And then out of within that conversation, he then said, "Oh, and I also have a girlfriend." It was almost like, I need you to believe that I am okay.
I don't know if it's that he wasn't close to his mom, but rather Japanese society kind of sets boundaries even between children and their parents. Because I feel like in America, even in Japan, at least in the animes that we've seen, they have like almost like career days where at some point you have to submit to your homeroom teacher or whatever have you about what your plans are after high school.
Mhm.
And it's so, I don't think diplomatic is the word, but almost like
Stifling, entrapment.
oh,
It's feel like you're being trapped.
official government. Like, I think in America, your parents talk to you and they're like, what do you want to do? And they explore your hobbies and you change your room around to fit your hobbies. And they leave the little things in your schedule so you can make time for the things you enjoy doing. And they're inquisitive about what you'd like to do. Whereas in Japan, it feels like they don't, that nurturing part is not something they hone with their children.
Alicia, again, we are talking about the animes that we watch, right? We went to Japan this past and we were there for a while and we saw a lot of the way that the people in Japan, how they act and how they dress and all of these different things. But by no means are we talking about it as if we have a first person view of a Japanese family. But we're looking more so at the movies and the anime that we watch,
Yeah.
or even a day in the life. You know, on YouTube, sometimes you can see a day in the life of a Japanese person and the way that they,
It's just official and, I don't know,
stoic and a little bit of
I'm gonna say stoic. It almost seems so, and again, maybe that's my ignorance because I feel like the only worldview I have of Japanese culture is through anime and what people would like us to see from what they show on YouTube. So it's a very like one-dimensional view of like family structure in Japan. But yeah, and I guess I'm saying, at least from the anime's perspective, I don't want to shit on Sato's mom because I feel like she did her due diligence. I think society made him feel like he needed to do more, be better, be perfect. And I think he was already a pretty emotional kid.
To be honest,
Yeah.
we didn't learn much about her. What we did learn about her was one, that she definitely checking in on him. She was definitely providing an allowance that her and her husband, Sato's father, was given to him for him to
Which would
survive.
beg you to believe that he was middle class.
Yeah, because they were not only dealing with their own personal finances, but they were also giving him enough money to pay his rent and eat and survive in
Yeah,
Tokyo, especially after he met Yamazaki. I mean, they started like really getting into the otaku culture. What was it, a gal
it's a
game?
gal
A
game.
gal game that they were making.
Which a lot of the characters look like to heart. The dating stuff that I've been really into. It's interesting to see. And at some point, Yamazaki and Sato were talking about making the perfect heroine for their game,
Yes.
for their visual novel. And she was like a robot maid servant.
Yeah, they were really trying to make her all
Every trope
one.
in one. And it's interesting because if you look at To Heart, there is a robot.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I'm not into gal games.
Messiah. There's a maid.
Yeah.
And she closed. It was just interesting to see. But I guess segueing back to what my mom was originally saying, why this even started for him in the first place, I have to say, in Sato's mom defense, even though we didn't know much about her, I feel like that spoke more of what we perceive to be what Japanese society is like in terms of speaking to your kids about what maybe they'd like to do for themselves rather than like it being her fault. Like why he has become a hikikomori or he is inflicted with this agoraphobia.
I think that maybe just the expectations of what society puts on an individual can put them into a state of just not being able to meet that expectation. And what do I do now? Do I try to fight through society and get to that expectation? Or do I even have it in me to do that? And I think that in Sato's case, he felt that he didn't have it. And he ended up deciding to, I think it was a decision. I think it just happened. I think he dropped out of school. He was in his room. One day he was in his room.
Yeah.
Second day he was in his room. Third day he was in his room. So it got to the point where this was his day.
He started doing like those food mail orders. He
Mhm.
started to well, he made his nightly trips. He took nightly trips to 7-Eleven
Yeah.
when there was like no one around but the
Exact.
cashier.
Which also is a caveat because he would meet Misaki in the park that was near the apartment building at I think 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, when no one was
When
there.
no one was around. So they had an actual appointment where they talked about a lot of things. They talked about like celebrities' last words, which was an interesting episode where they talked about someone that was a celebrity unaliving themselves and what that why they did it or what the particular issue was that was surrounding their life that would cause them to do it. And then we start to understand that Masaki had a lot of issues herself. If Masaki apparently had a lot of trauma also, we looked at Sato's trauma with being bullied, not meeting the expectations of what he thought he would be as an adult. And then we have Masaki, who her mother unalived herself. She lived with her stepfather, who was not only abusive to her mother, but also abusive to her. And now she was living with her aunt and trying to overcome all of the trauma that she was feeling and maybe being super isolated herself. Being able to function Sato because she had a job and she was able to move around freely, but she saw something in Sato that she saw in herself that she wanted to change. And this is what pushed her to wanting to do this therapeutic intervention with Sato. The anime really went through a lot of really big topics. It went through agoraphobia, it went through social phobias, it went through adjustment disorders. So adjustment disorder is like when you're trying to adjust to a change in your life and not being successful at it, right? Trying to figure out how do I fit into this new phase that is going on either in my direct environment or in my life, which can be very difficult. A lot of times when like we see a kid that's left one school and is going to another or moved away and now their entire environment is different. Not only your home where your home is where you're supposed to feel safe and now it's a different environment and you're trying to find your space in it, that can be very stressful for someone. And I think in many ways, a lot of these disorders start out as an issue with adjustment, and then it falls into where somebody is not able to adjust to that new environment. And these things start to come up, right? So in Misaki's situation, like she came in trying to help Sato, but we learned that in helping Sato, she was also trying to help herself.
Yeah, that tends to be how those things go, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you ask anybody why they became a social worker or what's the reason that they became a therapist, they'll say that it's because they wanted to help people. But in many ways, it was because maybe at a point in their life they needed help and maybe somebody helped them, or maybe in a point in their life they needed help and they didn't get the help that they needed. So now they're trying to like project that onto someone else and be able to help them in their time of need.
Was Misaki more of a detriment or a help to Sato?
She absolutely was a help to him.
It's funny because
There's one episode where she called them useless and hopeless. That episode where they went to the offline meeting. A group of individuals went to this remote island and they were going to unalive themselves. And Misaki and Yamazaki track him down. They go to the island and over her blowhorn, she's basically telling him, you suck. You're hopeless. You're a terrible person. But you know what? You're a person that's worse off than me. And when she said that, you understood that there was something in Sato that she saw within herself. So she was trying to change that thing in hopes that she would change it within herself. So it was a very strong point, and even Sato was pissed because he was like, yo, you just called me a piece of shit, basically. You called me all of these horrible things. And towards the end of the anime, maybe episode 23 or 24, he replays that part in his mind and he's like trying to save her now. And he makes the connection. So this whole time, I thought that she was being a pain in the ass because she was trying to change me or trying to help me. But the whole time, she was also trying to help herself.
I've been like crawling on Reddit and just different forums about NHK, and it's interesting because she's portrayed differently. There's a visual novel, the anime, and the manga, and she's portrayed differently in all three. In the manga, she's actually a bit more manipulative. So I was gonna say, good thing she's not a therapist because a therapist definitely. But yeah, and in the manga, I think something that I think even Wikipedia said in the anime, she's portrayed a lot more innocent than in the manga. In the manga, you could see a lot of the things she does is for the sole purpose, soul, but maybe 75% is to help herself. I read something that said most people think that Welcome to the NHK, the main character is Sato, but it's actually Misaki.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Because the whole thing is how Misaki is working towards helping Sato not be a Hikikomori anymore, right? But towards the end, he realized that this whole thing was actually to save herself. Yeah, they said it was just a real interesting spin because, at the end of it, you realize, holy crap, we were actually watching Misaki's transformation, not
Yeah.
Sato's.
Yeah, Misaki had a direct hand in helping Sato realize that being a Hikikomori was not the way that he should live his life, though. I think that there were a lot of things happen. And Misaki opened his eyes to the world a little bit. She allowed him to see something in other people. I think without Misaki, he wouldn't have opened up to Yamazaki. He wouldn't have turned him into his best friend and ventured into the concept of maybe making a gal game or calling up his high school upperclassmen and going off on vacation with her, which he thought was a vacation, but ended up she was gonna unalive herself. And he saved all of those people when they went to the remote island. His words stopped them from unaliving themselves. There were so many things that he was able to do that I think that he wouldn't have been able to do without the guidance that he got from Misaki.
I guess I was saying all of that to say, I guess almost like a PSA. Your therapist definitely shouldn't be telling you all that.
Oh, you know,
And like just to put it into Rocky was, she definitely didn't have a clinical license. She actually did not graduate high school.
no, she didn't. Well, actually, in that situation, Sato was a little bit going off because at least she graduated high school.
She definitely didn't have the credentials to help him. In the interest of the anime and the plot, she was his support system.
She really was.
And I think it's reasonable to say that she had a lot of flaws. They were both very flawed people. We all are, but they're both very flawed people.
But there were flawed people who found each other
Yes.
and were able to help each other when they needed it the most.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the main things that we should take from this anime. Even people who are in dark places or even people who are traumatized, they can find the light within each other.
Yeah, because even his senpai did.
Yes.
Because she was married, had a baby.
Yeah.
And she was still lost.
Yeah, and spoiler alert. But yeah, Sato was able to not be a Hikikomori anymore by the end of the anime. He was able to work. He was a worker.
No, at the end.
He was a construction worker. Oh wow! In the anime, he was a construction worker.
In the manga, I think he ended up becoming a programmer.
Oh wow!
And
Okay.
he had a picture of Misaki on his desk, and they were about to meet up because she had just finished getting her. In America, we'd call it a GED. I don't know if it's something different in Japan, but she had finally graduated.
In the anime, he was the one who was helping her get her GED.
So
he was like giving him.
Was like, it's time.
In the anime, he was a construction worker. His mother and father cut him off. He was paying his rent. He was buying food. He was doing all of the things that I guess society would expect of a young man to do. And he was helping Misaki get her GED. He was able to move away from being a Hikikomori and actually get to a point where he was self-actualized, right? So when we talk about those different hierarchy of needs, in school we learn about Abraham Maslow, right? Abraham Maslow he developed what we call a hierarchy of needs. At the bottom of the pyramid is our most basic needs: housing, food, air, water, all of those great things. And all the way at the top of the pyramid is what we call self-actualization, meeting or reaching your potential. And usually, most of us are somewhere in the middle, right? We're socializing, we're able to make intimate connections with other people, and we're trying to reach that self actualization. Maybe Sato didn't reach that level of self actualization, but at least he was better off than where he was,
Yeah.
which is no longer being a Hiki.
So we know he got there. What were the skills that he acquired in order to get himself out of that rut? And does that mean that he no longer has a Hikkimori diagnosis? Is that something that goes away?
It's something that totally ever goes away. You like address the symptoms. Like when I talk to my clients, I never say that we are going to cure your disorder, right? What we're going to do is that we're going to learn how to manage the symptoms that are associated. At the end of the anime, you still see him in his room. You still see him eating his cup of noodle. You still see him coming home from work, turning on the TV, falling asleep near his kotatsu. Really just like a lot of the same presentations that he had prior to him kind of addressing the symptoms connected to his hikikomorism, but at least he was able to socialize. He still had a friendship with Yamazaki, even though he moved away. He still was connecting to his upperclassmen, to his senpai, even though she was married and had a kid. He still would talk to her and she would send him letters and pictures of her kid. He still had an active relationship with his mom and dad. He spoke to coworkers at his job, and he still was maintaining a friendship with Misaki. So he was still having all of these different things that he was able to nurture. And that's one thing that somebody who has agoraphobia, who is a shut-in, isn't able to do. They're not able to really nurture relationships because they have such a phobia of connecting with somebody socially that they tend to not have that in their lives.
So that's a skill you would need to acquire in order to make steps.
Towards addressing the symptoms connected to your disorder, right? We don't use the word cure. We're addressing symptoms connected to our disorder.
So that's one skill. What would you say is another? So nurturing your relationships for better social communication and emotional health being.
Yeah.
What is another thing that maybe he did or what somebody that is in a similar situation should work on to, like you said, not
Yeah.
cure, but
Exposing themselves to different environments. So one episode, it was like his final or midterm, I forget, but he had like a test of courage that he had to do, and she took him to like Times Square, which probably was Shibuya, during New Year's, and there were tons of people around, and of course he immediately had a panic attack, right? Panic attacks are very much in association with social phobia, agoraphobia. He had a panic attack. He felt like he was being suffocated because he was in a outdoor environment, but there were so many people. He felt like he was so having that ability to be in a unfamiliar space or in a different space and being able to feel safe or at least be able to function is another symptom that you have to like address when you're diagnosed with agoraphobia or social phobia. Being able to be okay in a space that you not be familiar with or in a space where there are multiple people.
so I know we are hoping that people everywhere is able to hear about this podcast and
Yeah.
everything. But for somebody that is in not Japanese society, maybe I know that as viewers from more Western culture, we're watching anime, NHK in particular, and identify in some ways, and every culture is different, but I guess for Western sphere, if you found somebody that connected very much so with Sato, what steps would you persuade them to take to get into a more comfortable situation where they're able to function for themselves in society?
Well, that will if
What
it's
steps would you ask them to take now after
yeah.
hearing this podcast and watching it?
I have to say that if you're in a situation or he's in a situation that's very similar to Sato, they definitely need some kind of mental health intervention, some kind of an intervention to help them with being a shut in, having agoraphobia, being just completely removed from society, or having social phobia. There are a lot of avenues that an individual could take now to seek help. You don't even have to at first step into a therapist's office. You could do telehealth, which is over some kind of a media system like Zoom or Teams or DoxyMe, anything that a lot of clinicians use to do telehealth that helps individuals that can't get to an actual clinic. They can start off with telehealth, then do a couple of sessions in person to try to help them address those. So there are ways to start off when a person needs some kind of intervention where they're not at a place where maybe they can physically go. So I would say start off with that. They start talking to a therapist and they start talking about the issues that got them to where they are. And the hope is that from that intervention, from that talk therapy, you start to allow yourself to get out, to connect with other people. You start off slow, but eventually the hope is that process will help you get to a place where you're functioning a little bit better in society. Yeah.
Nice notes that we
We
should help someone make that
right.
first step.
We're gonna put a couple of notes of like how to seek therapy through text. A lot of different organizations that provide either low cost or sliding scale therapeutic intervention, or they work with your health insurance. And if you don't have health insurance, especially if you are an individual here in New York or here in the United States, you can always reach out to the marketplace so that you can get Medicaid. That will also help you with mental health services or seeking mental health services when you are ready to do. So thank you guys for staying in and diving in with us here into this first episode of Anime Deep Dive, which is the name.
We're still working out kinks.
Yeah. So this is episode number 1 of Anime Deep Dive. And again, I am your host, Dr. Yovi Midori, and my co-host, Gail. And we will see you soon with episode number 2. I think we're gonna do for episode number 2, we're gonna go a little different. We're gonna do The Boy and the Hero, which is the latest movie by the talented Hayao
Yeah, he's
Miyazaki.
awesome and all, but that movie was ass.
Yeah, but it's got a lot of connotation and a lot of allegoryism into
Yeah.
it. So it's gonna be a wild ride. So
Gal's gonna do a lot of listening.
so we will see you then. And this is the end of episode 1. Bye. Bye.